Hi, it's Elaine Hamilton from the Reiki Center. This discussion, I would like to talk about the root of suffering. Um, it's very simple and it's very difficult to hear, or it's not difficult to hear, but it's very difficult to accept, I think, to, to really, really accept it. And that's because we have a very powerful belief structure that we have built over many, many years, some of us decades, that is all evolved around what is right and what is wrong. And we start doing this very early on as children. And that's because we're told what is right, what's wrong. And we start in this dualistic world to get very fixated on value systems and this is right and that is wrong and he is right and he is wrong and blah, 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 blah. And then we start to build essentially a fantasy world around what we think should be happening. And we completely ignore what is actually happening. and it's incredible when you start to break it down. It is so sticky and it is so enticing. So when I say this, that the root of all suffering is when things are not going the way that you want them to go, or the way that you think things should be going. So in other words, reality is going against your belief systems. And it creates an enormous amount of suffering, enormous. And it's also an unwinnable, totally unwinnable situation. You cannot beat reality. It's never going to happen. And you know that on some level. Everybody knows that on some level. Like, I'm looking outside at the weather today and it's cloudy. And I know deep within my soul that I cannot will it to be sunny. It's going to be sunny if it's sunny, and it's going to rain if it's going to rain, and whatever. Now, I know that. And so I don't even waste my time wishing for it, right? Because I just know that. I know I can't win against the weather. Yet, not always. Sometimes I'll be out shopping and I'll go into a shop and it will be cloudy and I'll come out and it's pouring with rain. And as I'm walking through the rain, I will be suffering because I'll be walking through the rain, annoyed that it's raining and thinking it shouldn't be raining. Or alternatively, annoyed at myself because I didn't bring an umbrella. Either way, I'm annoyed because what is actually happening, I'm walking in the rain, is not what I want to be happening or think should be happening, right? And it's that this shouldn't be happening to me is the root of suffering. This shouldn't be happening to me. This shouldn't be happening to somebody else. This shouldn't be happening to the world. It doesn't matter. But essentially, anything whereby you are going against what is actually happening, that's the suffering. When you're going with the flow and you're happy with what's happening because it reflects your value system or it reflects what you want, we don't suffer, right? Like, if I went into the shop and I came out and it was beautiful sunshine, I'd be like, oh, it's beautiful sunshine, yay. And I'd be walking along quite happy. I wouldn't be suffering. Unless you're in Singapore, in which case I'd be like, oh, it's too hot. Can never win. But this is a really simple example. And when I break it down like that, it's kind of like, oh, yeah, okay, that's fair enough. But the reason I say it's really sticky and really difficult is because there's so much of this that we get involved with. So the weather is one thing. You think about, you know, you're driving, road rage, someone cuts you up, or you're sitting in traffic, or you're going to be late because there's a big crash ahead of you, or something like this. And just watch the irritation or the anxiety or whatever it is, whereby you're in a situation that is totally out of your control. Again, the weather, traffic, you know, these kinds of things. And you will either sit there and beat yourself up because you didn't leave enough time for an accident, or you're going to be railing against whoever caused the accident, or just in generally fed up because there is a snarl up and you're sitting in traffic and you don't want to be sitting in traffic. And you keep going with that. Relationships, people are not behaving the way you want them to. They're not saying the things you want them to. Situations, jobs. Oh my gosh. I mean, it's just every single thing that you can think of that creates suffering in your life. Maybe you create your own suffering. Most of us create loads of suffering just by the way we think about things. And thinking about, I don't want this to happen. I'm worried about that. This shouldn't be the way. That shouldn't be the way. And when you look at the whole structure, it's almost impossible to see a way out. Like, it's like, well, how do I, what, you know, how do I fix this? And one of the ways that you won't be able to fix it is by adding more thoughts to it, because that's what's causing the issue in the first place. Right. So if you think about your structure of thinking and the scaffolding of thoughts, when we suffer, we add more thoughts to it. So the whole thing, the whole issue is really around our thinking, right? And it's that ability to really notice when you are starting to get agitated. So when there is an agitation in the system, and then be really honest. What is it that I don't like? What is it that's happening here that I don't want to happen, or I don't think should be happening? And just that can sometimes relieve a lot of the suffering, because it's like, oh, I don't want to be sitting in traffic, or, oh, I don't want it to be raining. Maybe you see the humor in that. Maybe not. Hopefully you do. And it gets a bit more tricky when it's other people. You know, I don't want to be treated like this. I don't want them to think that about me. These things can be really sticky, right? Because then it's hitting on self-worth. Laughing about the fact that you're getting annoyed with the rain is one thing, but laughing about the fact that someone thinks something very bad towards you, in your opinion, can be a whole other thing. But it's still part of the same issue. So the same issue is that you are attaching such a strong belief in the fact that things should go your way. And this is like godlike craziness. Like, we all walk around thinking we are literally omnipotent. The whole universe should bend to my will. The whole universe should be the way that I want it to be. It's so egotistical. That's crazy, right? It's like, okay, that's going to happen. Oh my God. It's just insanity, absolute insanity that any of us think like this. And the fact that all of us think like this is kind of funny, right? It's kind of crazy. And this is why there's so much suffering in the world. And I want to do this, so I'm going to do it like this, and it should be like this, so I'm going to make it like this. And we create so much suffering, not only for ourselves, but for other people. The whole thing is insane. There is a certain movement of happening. Now, just because something is happening doesn't mean we have to condone it. And this is another thing that a lot of people get very upset when I start talking like this. But So if someone's treating me badly, that means I just let it happen? Like, no, that's not what I'm saying at all. It's like if you see a child beating up a cat, you don't just ignore it, right? I mean, you do something about it, obviously, but there is a difference between the suffering of that shouldn't have happened or that shouldn't be happening, and in the present moment, stopping that happening because you have the power to. But it's often like, and this is a really tricky one to talk about, but it's when you start thinking about global things. So this a war shouldn't be happening. People's suffering shouldn't be happening. World disasters shouldn't be happening. Global warming shouldn't be happening. Like these things create enormous amounts of suffering if you really are empathically engaged with that. And again, there can be a great deal of upsetness when I say this, but I mean, actually, you have to follow through the whole thing. You can't just stop at traffic and weather and go, oh, well, yeah, I can see I can't do anything about that. Well, you can't do anything about the weather, and you can't do anything about a war that is raging on the other side of the world from you, or in it, if you're in it. Like, you can't actually action on that. Like, it is the reality. It is actually what is happening. Now, there are certain actions you can do in any situation. Like when it's raining, you can bring an umbrella, right? When there's a war going on, you can act in ways that feel right to you, that feel right for your own energetic consciousness. But that's different from suffering. Like, you don't need to have the suffering that goes along with that. You can have empathy. You can have compassion. You can absolutely feel the pain and suffering. But there's a level of, what am I trying to say? I'm being careful with words because I want to say unnecessariness, but I don't want that to come across as callous. I'm not being callous when there are some very serious issues going on that planet. And I don't want to belittle them, but there is a level of suffering that I see in people who, and it is desperate. There's a level of suffering that we hold in our system when we really believe that this shouldn't be happening on whatever that is, whether it's sitting in traffic, whether it's war, whether it's relationship abuse you're suffering. Like, let's get grainy here, right? Like when things are really, really not the way you want it to be, there can be an enormous amount of suffering that goes with that. And it doesn't have to be that bad. If you can really start to let go, and this is where I'm saying it's really sticky and really tricky. And it's interesting, even as I'm talking about it, there's a part of me like, do you really want to be talking about this? Because I know that people get very upset, but the upsetness is the depth and level of your delusion around this. There's so much delusion that somehow by suffering and by willing, maybe this is more what it's about. It's like by willing and standing in the suffering enough, you will change it. And I really invite you to think through yourself, like what really is the logic behind my suffering? Like, what is the delusional that like the God status that I'm holding. There is somewhere in the psyche, there is this very unconscious belief that if I suffer enough, or if I stand in my dissatisfaction enough, or if I complain enough, it'll change. Like, what is that? So think about that. Like, really dive into it. Like, what is the point of all this suffering? What do I actually think is going to happen? Like, do I think if I'm in traffic fuming, the traffic is going to move faster? If I think that I cry enough about global warming, or if I stress enough, or if I'm anxious enough about global warming, it'll change. Like, what is actually going on with the thought process? And I think this is really important because it's these unquestioned states of suffering we put ourselves in that perpetuate it. It becomes a habit. It's like, well, of course. And people say this to me all the time. It's like, well, of course I'm worried about the war. Of course I'm worried about global warming. Of course, like I'm an idiot. Okay. Well, have you actually thought about what the point is? Like, what is the anxiety achieving? And is there a more peaceful resolution to that? Could you act and not suffer? Is this a possibility? And if not, why not? And these are really important questions because so much of our suffering is righteousness that is like, well, I can't help it. Everybody is worried about it. Everybody gets angry in traffic. Everybody complains about the weather. No, they don't actually. Most people, lots of people, but that's also because they haven't thought about it and they haven't really bothered. There's a certain mental laziness that we have that goes on that is just kind of like, well, this is what everyone does, so I do it too. Well, okay, but if you want to relieve your suffering and if you want to find inner peace and if you want to, wake up, then you got to do the hard graft, really. Like you've got to challenge this stuff because it's all structure. It's all like all of our belief systems were built for us. Like we're just totally programmed. We're like a computer program, but unlike a computer, we can think for ourselves. So there is a real opportunity for us to smash these things to smithereens, is to smash our belief systems down and go, well, why am I suffering? Like, do I need to suffer? And you'll really start to notice that this is the root of suffering. The root of suffering is when things don't go our way. And then it's a matter of going, well, okay, what in me thinks that everything should go my way? And am I okay when things don't go my way? Like, what's going to happen? Am I going to explode? Like, test it out. What happens? And really start to get more curious about the foundations of a lot of the stuff that we just take for granted because everyone else is doing it. Everyone else is upset about this or that or the other. Everyone else gets cross about this, that, and the other. So, and if they don't, then whatever. But start to question this stuff because not everybody does. That's the thing. There's a lot of people walking around with a lot of deep inner peace. They are still very active. They might be doing all kinds of amazing stuff. They might be very caring people, but it doesn't mean that they jump into reactivity and they're not controlled by their thoughts. They're not controlled by their belief structures. They don't knee-jerk reaction into anxiety just because something isn't going their way. They sit in traffic and meditate, right? They go out into the rain and they enjoy the experience. There's other ways of doing things. And that's just food for thought. Kind of a ranty video, maybe too ranty. Who knows? Anyway, put it out there. Hope it helps. Thank you.